Looks good. So, hi everybody. This is Steve Sabludowsky, publisher of BuyUBuzz.com. Good morning, good week. We're going to be talking politics, national politics, and a little bit local Louisiana politics too. We have Ronnah Gray and Jim Brown, and good morning to both of you.
Well, good morning, all you guys. Let's see. Happy Mardi Gras, happy Valentine's Day, happy Abraham birthday today. Lots of special events going on to celebrate, and particularly Mardi Gras. I was down for the weekend and going to look for a parade on Tuesday. So lots of peripheral busy things going on outside of the political world, and certainly plenty going on in the political world, Steve.
Sure, absolutely. And Ronnah, you ready for Mardi Gras?
I'm ready for Monday. That's as far as I've gotten so far. But yes, it seems like Mardi Gras has been going on for a month now. So yeah, I'm ready.
Right. So real quickly, if you don't mind, what is so special? I mean, because we have some people watching, outside of Louisiana. What is so special about Mardi Gras and here in New Orleans and Baton Rouge and Lafayette?
Well, and by the way, there's some major Mardi Gras parades in Shreveport and Alexandria, up in Natchez, kind of close to Faraday, where I used to live. It's spreading a good bit, but I think it's a combination of reasons. Number one, being a Catholic holiday, Louisiana is not as Catholic as it used to be, but still very concentrated Catholic, particularly in South Louisiana. Wednesday, the day after Mardi Gras, is the beginning of Lent. And Catholics take Lent a very serious time of year. I had lunch with a Catholic priest yesterday, and we were talking about the very special times within the Catholic Church. And he said, Christmas is important. We don't really know when Jesus was born, but it's become so commercial. But when you get into Lent and to Easter, that is our very, very special time. And so it's the last big blowout. Mardi Gras is before you start the Lenten season. So that's one of the special reasons. And then there's something about New Orleans in particular, Steve, where you live, when Ronnah and I come to all the time, to where there's this marvelous mix with all the dysfunction in government. They can't get their politics together at all. But when you look at the special confluence of music and the food and having the good times, it's an excuse to let something grow. And if you live down there, you certainly know that once you get through Mardi Gras, you move into the Irish Day parades and the Italian parades and the various festivals. New Orleans, it just has a special ambiance of growing in that way. And Mardi Gras, that was adopted back with one parade back in the early 1900s, has continued to blossom. And I think it also, there's an emergence in the last 20 years of the little guys. Mardi Gras used to be a high social event in New Orleans, run by the social establishment. You had the crews of Comus and Proteus and so many other crews that were kind of restricted, where we had this emergence into all these other festivals where so many other minorities, as well as just average folks, said, hey, we want to take a part of this too. We live in this great area of music and culture and food. Let's express ourselves. I think that last week, a week before Mardi Gras, there were 26 parades in the greater New Orleans area. 26. And I don't know how many there are yesterday, tonight, all day tomorrow. And so it's kind of sparked, a spark set it off because of the special ambiance of living in Louisiana, particularly down in New Orleans, I think. Ronnah, what do you think?
Go ahead, Ronnah.
Oh, yeah, and it's not just New Orleans. I mean, the whole Gulf Coast has gotten into it. And a good friend of Jim and I, Val Marmillion, started a crew down in Key West where he lives when he moved down there, and they parade. And he's actually in Venice, Jim, for Carnival in Venice, which is a totally different experience, but really reminds me of what you're talking about, the old meeting of Rex and Comus and the pageantry that New Orleans had in years gone by.
But it's grown from that. But again, Val Marmillion is a little South Louisiana guy. The biggest festival in Washington, D.C. is the Washington Mardi Gras.
That's right.
Louisianians have a way of expressing themselves and knowing how to have a good time, bringing in the very best of their music and bringing in music from outside. So many musicians this weekend. I saw Rod Stewart, by the way, Saturday night down at the Superdome, 30,000 people. He didn't come on till midnight. Now, I'm fighting to stay awake till midnight, and he's over about 1:30, and then the party just really got going. I had to stumble out there and talk my wife out of leaving. But that's just kind of a Jolie V way of life that is so special. And that's why, by the way, the New York Times, as one of the major reasons, the New York Times has profiled all the places in the world to go to in 2018. Number one on their list is New Orleans. So all the viewers down in our part of the way, I think, can understand that it's the 300th anniversary of New Orleans, but it's just not that. It's this whole culture with Jazz Fest coming up, with the French Quarter Festival. It just goes on and on and on, and that's why it's such a great place to live.
Okay, so let's talk about some national issues right now. This is Infrastructure Week again. The president is going to announce more information about infrastructure. Our governor is up there in Washington, D.C., Governor John Bel Edwards, and he's taking part. So, do you think that infrastructure could possibly be the issue that brings this country together, that sorely needs to be brought together?
Well, Steve, my thoughts is that, look, we three will agree, and I think most of your viewers will agree, that we've got a massive infrastructure problem in this country. I fly into New York to LaGuardia Airport. That's just a mess. It just needs massive buildup up that way. We can look at our roads and highways. I traveled from Covington across Louisiana on a bumpy I-10 that just needs so much work. The bridge work, circular areas around this way. What New Orleans, for example, needs just in sewers and water reconstruction. So it's massive. On the other hand, I'm not sure it's a lightning rod that really defines the parties. I think that everybody thinks, look, they've all been up there and haven't done much about the infrastructure that needs to be done. But I don't see it as a Republican Democrat issue or a real lightning rod issue that gets people really excited. I think if you poll it, do we need to do more with our infrastructure? People would say yes. But if you get into the difference between Republicans, Democrats, is this going to be a reason why you vote for or against your congressman? I just don't think it hits home at that level, quite frankly.
Ronnah?
I think the fight's going to break out, Steve, over how to pay for it. And everybody wants these things and realizes we need them, but nobody wants to really pony up and pay for the things, the billions and billions of dollars. And then where the partisanship is going to come in, and probably both parties, that probably won't be partisanship, both parties will be guilty, is they're going to go after these projects for their districts. They're not going to look at the big picture. They're going to go after getting a bridge in their district or getting a road widened, because Jim's right. We have just billions and billions of dollars of needs, and there won't be enough money to pay for everything. So the fight's going to break out over who gets the project. That's where the real wheeling and dealing is going to go on. I'm glad our governor's gone to Washington with the president for this discussion today, because to me, Louisiana should be a poster child for infrastructure needs in America today.
And one
okay,
of the
so I just put up a tweet, and if I might just, this is a tweet actually that basically is saying that, bear with me, from President Trump, this will be a big week for infrastructure after so stupidly spending $7 trillion in the Middle East. It is now time to start investing in our country. Is that helpful?
Well, I think a lot of people agree with the fact that we spent so much money in the Middle East that probably should not have been spent at that level. We still don't know what we're trying to accomplish there, how much money is being spent. And so I don't think it's helpful or hurtful. I think it's the fact that rings true to an awful lot of people, number one. And I also saw the president, Steve, this week talk about the fact that the privatization, he brought privatization in a lot of these projects into the mix, something that, as you know, I've written about on Bayou Buzz on several occasions, about the fact that there are Can we privatize? I've given example after example of projects around the country that have been privatized. They're doing very, very well. And so it'll be interesting to see how Governor John Bel Edwards and other governors respond to that effort, how it mixes into the federal, state, local mix. So there's some very complicated decisions that need to be made. And as Ronnah said, that when all is said and done, it comes down to funding. Here we have a country that's trillions of dollars in debt, more debt. Conservative columnists are blasting Republicans for voting for more and more spending. And so how you generate that mix in an election year where the spending seems to go hog wild with more spending needing for infrastructure, do you bring privatization in? And that's where real leadership is going in. And Trump throws these ideas out, but unless he gets very specific, I just think it's going to be I just don't think that when all is said and done, we're going to see a whole lot of progress, quite frankly.
And when you talk about privatization, you're going to get into another sticky subject, and that's going to be foreign investment in U.S. infrastructure projects, because the countries that really look at long-term investments of this nature are countries like China. Spain does this in a big way. And so while you're focused on rebuilding America, you are also going to draw a lot of attention. There's not that many companies that are US based that look at 50-year, 100-year investments like the Asian countries do, for example. So you'll draw the long-term funding partners in these P3, they call it public-private partnerships. You'll draw those long-term funding interest, but is that what the president's going to want? You know, because you're going to suddenly hear some screaming about China owning our roads or something like that. Communists owning our roads, and can they one day take control of them?
Look, if we can have a new bridge crossing in Baton Rouge and 4-laning or 6-laning and making a good viable entree for 20 years, if the Chinese want to come try to take it over, that's pretty far-fetched. But you're right. There is. I see that response, Ron. I see that response. I say, anybody who wants to invest, bring it on in. Bring it on in. Let's go.
Okay, so actually the president, the administration just released a plan this morning, and says that it will stimulate at least 1.5 trillion in new investment, shorten project permitting time to 2 years, trying to expedite the project permitting, improve training to get more qualified workers, and boost investment in rural projects. So, as I understand it, basically the federal government is going to be putting up $200 billion of the 1.5 trillion. Is that enough?
Where's the rest coming from, Steve? I mean, I guess there could be some borrowing. I think that's where the devil's in the details. If you're going to put significant infrastructure projects into Louisiana, invariably there's a federal state match. And so Louisiana may get 80% federal funding, but they've got to come up with their 20%. And that doesn't sound like, it sounds like a pretty good deal. But when your state is busted and the governor is having a special session just about a week away to try to salvage just balancing the budget, coming up with a federal match may be a very difficult challenge for Louisiana and other states. So that's where all the details have to be worked out.
And these public-private partnerships are largely based on tolling the roads. And so there is a public finance component in that the U.S. government or a private partner can put up a percentage of the total construction cost, and they can bond that toll revenue out over years to build it and take 20 years to pay it off, and then turn it into either drop the tolls or turn it into something that generates money to build other roads. But I feel sure tolling will at least be on the table with the discussion of bridges and new roads, and it'll have to be.
And if you travel around the country, you look at the major exit flow coming out of Washington, D.C. going to Virginia is a toll road, privately owned. The busiest bridge crossing from Detroit into Canada is a toll road. my daughter lives at Hood River, Oregon, and has to commute every day over to Washington to her job. And it's a private bridge owned by a family, and she pays $1 each way, and it's a toll, and they bonded that toll. And so there's some creative things going on small projects and little projects, but you got to have a visionary governor, quite frankly, that says, look, we'll take that match, and then what you do on the state level, I think, becomes very important.
Okay, so in terms of the state level, the question is, as you mentioned, whether or not Louisiana, given the financial restraints that we have, whether or not we can even participate and in this infrastructure opportunity. So if you were the governor, Ronnah, where would you go ahead and try to put whatever money we get from the federal government and try to match whatever the match might be? What do you think our greatest needs might be?
In Louisiana, I think the greatest need is doing something in the capital region. And I know you're sitting in New Orleans. There's tremendous needs down there too. But there's so much that goes through the capital region that affects the whole state. And we've let this city, where Jim and I are sitting, turn into one of the biggest gridlock cities in America now. And so the previous governor did a lot in North Louisiana. And I know there were needs there too. I'm not saying any of the needs are not legitimate, but there was tremendous money spent in North Louisiana projects under the previous administration. And I have seen, for whatever reason, the capital region delegation has not been able to get their act together. Again, it comes down to parochialism. And I've heard other governors say, if the delegation gets together and brings us a project, okay, we'll move on it. And so that's where I think the New Orleans delegation's been more effective. North Louisiana certainly has been more effective, and we haven't in this area. And I'd like to see, we've got the only place in America where I-10 narrows down to one lane coming across the bridge. Now the governor has announced that project, and hopefully it's moving ahead. The best thing I hear out of the president's announcement is a reduction in the environmental assessment period for these projects. When environmental assessments can take 5 years sometimes to get done, because there's different phases that are required for different projects depending on sensitivity. It's needed, but I don't think it's needed for that length of time. We talk about announcing a project, and you hope that you're driving on it in 20 years in some cases. So speeding up the project, if the president can actually do that, that's a big, big win. And in the state, I would say, help this capital region get moving.
Yeah, Ron, I had a developer that has spent all his life developing in Baton Rouge. As a Jim, I'm looking elsewhere. I've got to go out in surrounding areas or even into other cities, he says, because of the traffic jams of the busiest interstate in America, he says, but it can't, there's all this talk, but it won't be completed in my lifetime, he told me. He said, so why do I want to continue to invest my money where gridlock holds us down? And Steve, following what Ronnah said about North Louisiana, Bennett Johnson, who was from Shreveport, when I drive to Shreveport, there are 3 different bypasses to get around Shreveport. You get the river bypass, you can go around the Dallas bypass. There's 3 different bypasses. Nothing cutting up the city like we've cut up Baton Rouge or New Orleans cut up itself, but bypasses around the city. And we don't have much to show down here. I had somebody, I don't know all the background of it, but said Bennett Johnson looked after where he came from. We're very critical of Senator Russell Long, the most powerful financial member of the Senate, who should have taken the initiative to do more road construction wise, where he's from Baton Rouge in the Baton Rouge area. Baton Rouge is just such a huge disappointment of a cut up, bogged down situation. And so Ronnah's right on that.
Well, we've got 2 U.S. senators. We've got 2 U.S. senators from Baton Rouge, and they're both members of the president's party. So we should be looking to them to really bring home some projects here that can solve this problem for us.
Well, I hope so, if they can find the money. It's a question of
yeah, and that's where I'm getting. Finding the money, whether it's the federal government or the state government. I know that some conservatives are very critical right now about what has happened regarding the budget. I mean, if you're talking about the tax bill, and then of course, last week what happened, and the president's releasing his budget today, the infrastructure. I mean, how are we going to afford all this?
Well, and just gave a tax cut. Just gave a
Sure.
huge tax cut. So less money coming in now. And his philosophy is it will stimulate more growth, and we'll see more money coming in. But that's the problem, and that's the problem on the federal level of getting the money in a pot to be divvied up, and that's the problem on Louisiana state level in terms of a broke state and where you come up with any match. There's going to be a significant match if you're really going to do any good. Do you privatize it? Do you put more taxes on people? And I don't think you're going to see any gasoline tax in Louisiana. There's such an anti-feeling towards the misuse of going on. Every day you pick up the paper and see where there's been misuse of state money. And so as a consequence, it calls for a national leader and a state leader, and they both got their work cut out for them.
So let me just follow up on that. Back in last decade, Bobby Jindal took over as governor of the state of Louisiana, and as you know, I mean, the Stelly plan basically was repealed, and so we had money coming in terms of Hurricane Katrina, and for 7 years we were borrowing money from one department, one agency to another. The last 2 years, including this third year, the governor has called, I think now, 6 or 7 special sessions to try to deal with, what happened under Governor Jindal. Now, obviously, we would not be in this tax situation if we cut, and if the cuts were commensurate. And of course, we had also the oil crisis in terms of the oil prices drop. So are we repeating the same type of scenario where maybe we're hoping that this economic development will stimulate the economy and bring money back into the treasury, but it ends up not doing that and does just the opposite? That is, if you don't cut.
Well, it's just hard to say. I'm not sure it's a doomsday scenario. You've got I saw where the cheap gas that I used to get at Costco and Sam's is now up to almost $2.50 a gallon, and so gas prices are going up, which means the price of a barrel of oil is going up, which brings dollars into to the state treasury. This tax cut that came through gives more money, quite frankly, to the state in terms of what you can and cannot deduct. And so I'm not sure what the balance is. I've been around for 28 years when I was a public official and seen these budgets, not flim flam, but you never know the projections, who to trust on this, Steve. And so the state obviously has a deep hole to fill. The governor says he's cut, but then the Republicans are accusing him of really just delaying payments to contractors. That's how his cuts are going on. And there's been no significant real cuts into programs or into different departments. And so all that's going on, and you and I and the general public out there don't know who to trust. And so somehow that we kind of limp along every year. We've done it for 28 years. The day I took office, Edwin Edwards was complaining in 1971 about how broke the state was, how John McKithen left him broke. Then times got good. And then we've been broke for 28 years, going on 40 years now since I've been out of office. But somehow or other, we're able to kind of make it on through. And
but I'm talking about the federal government. I'm talking about, and I was using Bobby Jindal in the state of Louisiana just as a analogy. Ronnah.
What's your question, Steve? I'm sorry.
Okay, so I'm using the Jindal situation as the analogy where we did actually get rid of the Stelly tax. That was a sizable tax that was coming into the state of Louisiana in terms of revenues. We got rid of it. For 1 year, we had money coming in because of Katrina. And then after that, I mean, basically we've been borrowing from from one pot to fill the other pot. And under the last 2 years, under this governor, John Bel Edwards, we've had to really dig deep, and we've had to raise taxes in terms of sales taxes, and we've had to do some cuts too. So now we'll have a special session coming up. The point I'm making is, does the federal government, can we depend upon, these programs that have been implemented, now also infrastructure, and say that we're not going to have a revenue issue, to be able to take care of all these needs federally. We know what happened in the state government.
We're going to have a revenue issue, even as Jim mentioned earlier, on our match. If it's a 20% state match, yes, we're going to have trouble coming up with that. Local governments will have trouble coming up with whatever their match may be, if any, to make these infrastructure projects work. That's why I think the gas tax, I know our state didn't go along with it, but somehow the public has to come to terms with the fact that if we want the things we see, we have so many people from Louisiana who go to Texas. Texas has a phenomenal toll road program. So many people go to Florida, phenomenal toll road program. Texas started out with a public-private partnership tolling. It was so successful. It was making so much money that they took it over from the private partner and set up a toll authority and run it as the state. And the state funds the ability to build new roads. They could put one toll road in and then spin off, not just pay for it, spin off money to do the surface roads, get off the freeway and improve the surface roads. That's how successful they are in Texas. And our people go there all the time for vacation, for work. There's so much back and forth, and see that. We have to come to terms with the fact that it costs money. It costs a little bit more to have these things. And if we want to have them, we have to pay for them in some way. Not too many years ago, former Senator Vitter floated out tolling. You have a huge backlash in this state. We looked at a loop around Baton Rouge. Jim's right, Shreveport's got 3. We looked at we have the fewest river crossings in Baton Rouge of any other major city that has a river that they've got to get across, get traffic across and commuters across. And yet when it was floated out, a couple of toll projects, there was a big public backlash. People saying, we might consider, if you're building a new bridge, tolling it. We will never go along with tolling existing roadways just to widen them. Well, that's what people are doing. I mean, Louisiana has to come to terms with, are we going to have those things? I don't think the state government can be cut enough more. Can they cut? Absolutely. You can always find, I could go in there, and I'm sure Jim could go in there, and you could go in there. We could say, you could cut this, you could cut this. It's not going to bring the kind of money that we need to really be a first-class state. The public is going to either have to say, we want that and we'll pay for it, or, hey, we're just not going to be that. We're going to be Mardi Gras and tourism and a great place to visit and a fun place to live, but we're not going to really compete economics.
Can the feds support all this, even if they put up, say, 200?
I think so. I think they're going to have to come to some realization also on what this big tax cut did. I imagine a year or two from now, they'll be reeling some of that in, because it's going to increase the debt and our deficit, and they'll have to rein it in some. But yes, I think it is something the government can invest in. Maybe not, yeah. And also build up the military and build up all the other things the president wants to do. But I do think they can find places to make, because you're talking about matches, federal, state, local match, tolling, public pays in. Those are things we can do as a country, I think.
But you got to have creative leadership, Steve. And I've never heard the option of private public being ever come out of the mouth of the present governor. Never mentioned it. No. I haven't had one legislator talk about it, Republican or Democrat. We don't have visionaries, and I can go back and tell you we used to have a lot of visionaries. You don't see that right now. Ronnah's right. You couldn't expand an existing road and put a whole toll on it. How about this, though? Like Texas does. I've got a daughter that lives in the Woodlands, north of Houston. and I go, Houston, go up there. Well, in the outside lane, just that one lane, you can buy a sticker, or you can pay, and it's the fast lane. That one lane is the fast lane. If you don't have a sticker, you can't get in that fast lane, and traffic just shoots up that pretty well. And so you pay for a new lane by charging just for that lane. There are just so many creative ideas, but I've not heard one legislator, I've not heard the governor or any responsible person that lobby and the good government groups. We're all in the same mindset. There is just no vision, and that's the biggest single problem I see. I had lunch yesterday with James Carville, the Raging Cajun, the diehard Democrat, and we talked about this very thing, about vision in the state of Louisiana. And he's teaching a course at LSU, Steve, in political history. And he's trying to deal with the problem of so many millennials, young people, moving out of the state of Louisiana. And he says they don't see the vision. They don't see the long-range vision of where this state's going to go and how we accomplish goals to make this a better place. We didn't have a chance of getting Amazon to come in here. But when you looked at the technical people Amazon wanted, we had one of the smallest numbers of any state in the country. Carville said, if you're bright and you've got a really good education, you can make a good living in Louisiana. But if you're just an average person, a young kid that maybe just gets this basic college degree, average student, those are the ones who are moving out because they don't have the opportunity in this state. So it all ties together. You've got to have that vision. And quite frankly, Steve, we do not have that vision now in this state.
Ronnah, you agree?
Well, we have some of the mechanisms in place, actually. We have tolling authorities in place legally. We have a public-private partnership commission or something at DOTD that looks at these. But for whatever reason, through multiple governors, no one's really pulled the trigger on that and really gotten into it robustly. I think, again, it's because when they do, there is a public backlash. I mentioned jokingly earlier about the foreign companies, but when we looked at a toll road around the capital city, we had conservative factions nervous over Chinese investment in our roads, and it backed the legislators down. It made them retreat from those things and say, "Oh no, we're not going to do that." Then you get into all this NIMBY stuff. Not in my backyard. You want to expand lanes, it's going to go close to some development. People are saying, oh no, we've moved out from the city core to get away from crime, to get away from traffic. So we've moved out, and that's where you want to put the loop. Now you're just bringing the traffic and the crime to us. They fought it. So I totally agree with Jim, but I'm also going to say we, the people, have a role in this, and we're not really doing our part either. To be, if the public was showing up at meetings and saying you need to build those roads, and yes, then these legislators, that's what they respond to. They respond to 10 people can get mad and shut down a transportation project because our leaders get nervous about that. So we need the 100 people that stayed home because they thought the project was going to be fine, or the 500 people that said, I don't need to go to that meeting, I'm all for that project. But 10 people will go start a petition and scream on road projects. And one of the interesting things, we brought a group of, on a project I was working on, we brought a group of legislators from Texas over here for a lunch meeting to let them talk to them. And they all said, you're going to think the world's against you. Just power ahead and build these roads, and then you're going to be everybody's best friend. But we haven't had the leadership, as Jim says, at any level to power through. You can really shut things down with a small vocal minority in this state, and they effectively do it on a lot of things. And so we need the majority to get activated there.
I just put up a tweet changing subjects for a second. One of the things that really came up this weekend and a lot of part of last week. So here's a tweet from Rob Reiner. The only reason Donald Trump is not firing John Kelly over his handling of Rob Porter's abuse of women is because Donald Trump abuses women. ask the 20 women who have come forward, ask the ex-wife, ask the First Lady. Is that fair? Jump off.
Well, it's not a question of what's fair. There's a different standard being held when you're the president. You can obviously, there's a different standard with Donald Trump. I mean, look how far he's come with a very colorful and controversial background. I think the issue now is that brings us all to a head is the fact that there's been an internal huge scandal in the White House where 2 staff members have resigned because of abuse of their spouses. And so I think the controversy that lights it is that, and when I got home last night from New Orleans, I turned on MSNBC and I turned on CNN, and all they were talking about was this internal FBI problem over Rob Porter, the fellow that abused his wife. That's all they talked about. This morning when I got up, I turned it on. That's all MSNBC, Morning Joe's talking about. And look, it's terrible. The guy should not be in the White House if he abused his wife. But is that the only thing we talk about Saturday, Sunday, Monday? And we've become obsessed, quite frankly. And Trump hasn't, I don't know whether he's helped himself or not. I've got his tweet right here, and he says, people's lives are being shattered and destroyed by a mere allegation. Some are true and some are false. Some are old and some are new. There is no recovery for someone falsely accused. Life and career are gone. Is there no such thing any longer as due process? And a number of people are highly critical of the president for saying something like that. Well, quite frankly, it's a pretty, he probably should have said something. Where I think he failed was in not responding to the fact that if these allegations are true, then my heart goes out to the women involved, because no woman should be treated like that. Half the tweet should have been responding to the women. But I mean, who can argue with the fact that there are false statements out there, that someone has a right to at least clear their name? And so the whole thing is mirrored us down, Steve, and that's the major discussion. You want to talk about infrastructure today. That's not what cable news wants to talk about. They want to talk about the internal skirmishes of the personalities there. So,
well, I think if you would have put on Fox News, you would have seen nothing but, the FBI. So I think it's fair game. I mean, it's not just MSNBC and CNN. Ronnah.
I totally agree. I don't watch too much cable news anymore because I don't like the panels that are just giving their opinion. I try to go get some news and then go sort it out myself. And I read more, I guess, than television. But I read that Fox News isn't covering the Rob Porter story at all. I saw Kellyanne Conway on ABC News over the weekend, and she said it was very hard not to believe the women. I mean, when the president talks about due process would be if there were some charges against him. I believe these women, especially the second ex-wife, followed due process. They got restraining orders. When they were interviewed by the FBI, they disclosed the problems that there were. And so I think they weren't sensationalizing everything. The people in the White House have known since the beginning that this man couldn't pass a background check because of these. It wasn't until the third woman came forward and said, and 2 of these women work in federal government positions. It wasn't until the third woman came forward and said, he's in a sensitive area and unable to pass a background check because of this. This puts people who are handling the most highly classified documents possible, in the FBI's opinion, in a position to be blackmailed. And so when you can't pass those, then, move on, get someone else. It's a privilege to work for the President of the United States. And if we're not putting this man in jail. When you talk about due process, no one's suggesting at this point he go to jail. It's just that's a privilege that he might not meet the standards of. So move on, get somebody in there that can hand President Trump the sensitive documents to sign and process information, and we don't have to worry about that. I think that it should have been handled a long time ago.
Well, the question I have
is gone. And so, Steve, why don't we schedule a session tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and let's just all talk about this for weeks to come and not talk about infrastructure. Both guys are gone. It wasn't handled properly, but there's lots of things that have not been handled properly in the White House. And so how long do we beat this horse to death, I guess is my question.
Well, the thing is, I think there are other issues that are related to this and that are really compelling issues. I mean, again, you're not making the same statement about the FBI situation and the memos that are nonstop discussion on Fox and on news TV and on the internet.
No, I'm not. And let me tell you, I wrote a column on Bayou Buzz, and let me tell you about the column, Steve.
Wait, we're not ready for that yet. Okay, we'll talk about that in a second.
I want to talk about it before we shut down today, and tell you the response I've gotten off what I said from all over America. So that's a legitimate subject that should be talked about today and tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday and Friday, and Saturday and Sunday too.
Okay, so I think I hear what you're saying, and let me just kind of throw this out to you. You're saying that that recognizing that women are being abused is not something that we should talk about Tuesday to Monday, and you're saying that when the president is going to support a person who really should not have been there and is not going to say anything about maybe his chief of staff, who maybe should have been fired for allowing him to stay there, and you're going to say that the president, who is always going to just throw things out without any kind of due process for those people that he's against, that we shouldn't talk about that? I mean, this is really important stuff. I mean, if he's going to say due process is important, then I certainly would hope that he would stick to due process when he tweets and he blasts people, for doing things that they didn't do. So, I know how important the FBI issue, and I agree it's important. But, round the clock, by Fox on that, and round the clock by MSNBC and CNN about the other, should be put into, I think, perspective. And in this case, this issue is important. The president doesn't see it. And as a result, the Metoo movement, as Steve Bannon said, I think is going to get even stronger. Let's just talk about that for a second. We'll talk about your column.
Well, Rob Porter is gone, and he was gone a week ago, and there's been a great deal of talk about it. And as I said when I first started this, I think the president in his tweet should have said something in response to the women. So he's gone. The criticism is there. I'm just wondering how long we carry this debate about
because it's
Rob
not
Porter.
Just a Rob Porter issue. Is my point. It's an issue about the man at the very top, who seems to be very insensitive about those claims that are being made by women against himself and his friends, but is always going to go and criticize, those people who say are going after him. Ronnah?
I totally agree, Steve. Women are going to talk about this until the President of the United States and the leader of the free world shows some compassion for women. And the reason he's not is because of exactly what you're saying. He has some stories in his own life that he doesn't really want to talk about. If you don't want to listen to that, you go to Fox News where they don't cover it. If you don't want to listen to that, you do like Jim does and read the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, where it's one story it may not even be on the front page this week. But there is a place for the discussion, and there are going to be some reporters and some women who continue this discussion. First of all, this has been going on for decades, and women, not every person out there who's in a position like that. We didn't know about the guy who just popped up, the speechwriter. We didn't know about that. These things are going to continue to come forward. What's happening is, every time there's a big story, women become empowered to go speak up about things that they haven't spoken up about before. And so every time it comes up and someone empowers involved, it's going to be a news story. But if you want to not listen to it, you can get your news from another outlet that seems to not even think it's worth covering.
What about what Steve Bannon said in terms of the
I
Me
think
Too?
that was a very important statement that Steve Bannon made. And he said, basically, for our listeners that didn't hear it, that the Me Too movement has the potential to have a greater impact on election cycles than the Tea Party did, or some of the other major sweeps through Congress. Emily's List, which funds basically progressive women candidates, goes from having 3,000 or so inquiries from women about running for offices around the country to 26,000 and growing now. So it's a movement that is definitely going to affect the elections. Trump is losing support. He's holding pretty steady in his base, but the one place he's losing support is with educated white females. And that is another reason Steve Bannon took notice. Hey, better pay attention. Something's going on here that could potentially affect the midterm elections for this president. So his handling of it is bigger than just, how he feels for the day. He feels a lot of ways that I don't necessarily agree with, but he's got his opinion. He can say it and move on. But I think people around him are trying to say, hey, better pay attention to this. It could affect us.
Okay, so I just put up a tweet. We're going to talk about the FBI. So we're going to move on also. And here's a tweet. It says, it seems the FBI during Obama's tenure acted like the Democratic Party's private protection agency and police force. Jim.
Well, I don't think the FBI protected Obama, and they're certainly not protecting Donald Trump right now. I mean, I think if you look at the whole history of the FBI, going back way pre-J. Edgar Hoover, you've seen a great deal of abuses, and I've written about those abuses. And I just mentioned before, I've just been overwhelmed with emails and with calls and with people that wrote columns based on some of the things I said about the response of the FBI. And I want to bring it home right now because Robert Mueller is so much in the news. He's this good guy that's investigating Donald Trump. There was a national column that appeared in the Baton Rouge newspaper this week, Steve. It's a column written by Byron York, a regular columnist for The Advocate up this way. And it talks about Mueller. And one of ours, we had a guy named Stephen Hatfield that went to as a professor at LSU that was accused of being involved in the anthrax investigation. And so it's reviewed here today. It's just one abuse of the FBI. And what it goes to say is that Hatfield was given $5.82 million because he was falsely accused. $5.82 million. They asked Mueller what his response to this was, where the FBI publicly said he was innocent, paid him this money. Mueller, then who was head of the FBI, says about Hatfield, he goes to say that when reporters did ask him about it, Mueller was graceless. I do not apologize for any aspect of the investigation, he said. It would be erroneous to say there were mistakes. Erroneous to say there were mistakes. And that's just kind of the general attitude of the gotcha mentality. And so, like I say, I don't think it's an Obama force that protected Obama, I think that we're seeing in the Hillary Clinton investigation. Democrats say that the FBI is stumbling, caused Hillary Clinton not to be president. So I think it's a question of both parties and not the proper control. And quite frankly, that control should come from Congress. And unfortunately, the efforts to bring about some control right now are mirrored in politics, Republicans versus Democrats. The memo situation. Will Trump release the Democratic memo, which he should, quite frankly? And so the point I'm making is, the only thing I want to tell you today is I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago, it was in Bayou Buzz, and I've gotten responses from all over the country. Ron, on our radio show last week, we had Bill Anderson on, the professor up at Fosburg University, who writes a really interesting column in a number of newspapers. he picked up on what I said and wrote a riveting column about all the problems with, and so I'm just glad to see that they're reading us on Bayou Buzz, Steve, apparently, because I'm getting a lot of response to it, and that's the point I was making.
Sure, thank you. Ronnah?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the Stephen Hatfield case because I worked at LSU, and when some of that was coming out, it was very interesting. Unfortunately, a lot of that stuff is sealed, and it's hard to get to the bottom of that. But that man his career was ruined as a scientist, no question about it. He got a settlement both from the FBI and from some national news media outlets, which reported erroneously erroneous information about him. So he did end up being a case that seems to have been mishandled. I mean, we'll never know why, because they settle and seal everything, and we don't ever understand where the mistakes were made. And that's unfortunate, because you don't know if it's rogue agents making it, if it's systemic in the FBI. I don't know. My sister actually worked for the FBI in the Mueller administration for him at FBI headquarters in the Hoover building, and with Comey. I mean, I hear a lot of stories from her about that level of the FBI. I've seen abuses, just as Jim has, on local levels. Somewhere in between, I think, is the truth about the FBI. Certainly, there have to be some dedicated professionals there. Certainly, it's an agency worth keeping, but I have sure seen abuse abuse of power in a big part by agents who feel like they want some certain outcome and do what they can to get to that outcome, instead of discovering along the way what the truth is. So I think the shining the light on them is good.
And Steve, it goes to the bigger issue you made about, at some point, there needs to be a balance. In the FBI case, or rather in the Hatfield case, the minute an allegation was made, LSU threw the guy under the bus, fired him. Oh, we want nothing to do with that, even though he said he was completely innocent. Boom, he was gone. Well, we see that happening in a cross-section of issues in our country today, where someone makes an accusation, boy, the person is tainted, and boom. And so the pendulum needs to be a balance. There seems to got to be some way where we look at fairness. And often in many of these issues we're debating today, because of the extremes you mentioned, Steve, of Fox News in one instance and CNN, MSNBC in the other, there is no balance on many issues. On accusations, there's no balance. On the news, there's no balance. Often we've gotten away from the balance that we seem to have much more of in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s. We don't have that today.
In fact, I call it parallel universe. Here, sticking to the FBI situation, I did put up another tweet, and basically what it says is that the FBI and DNC used fraudulent manufactured evidence, a planted Yahoo story, and a former undercover FBI employee to surveil an innocent presidential candidate in their attempt to orchestrate a soft coup on our elected government and subvert our democracy. This was treason. Response.
Well, I don't know specifically what the person is talking about, but you're not getting many tweets in today, Steve, saying, pray, oh Lord, bless the FBI. There are.
Well, I'm selecting these tweets myself.
Well, you're right, Jim. They have suffered in this scrutiny. You're right. There's a public perception of that agency that's down the tubes right now, right or wrong. Public opinion has definitely turned against that agency. So it's on somebody's to-do list to figure out how to restore that. I think you're talking about the Michael Isikoff story with Yahoo. I've heard him describe that on talk shows before. But again, the word treason sure is being thrown around lightly these days, even to include not applauding the president. So it's hard to say that anything that was done there is treason. I think what's interesting about the women with Rob Porter and the Stephen Hatfield story, which I think was a travesty, is that no one stood up and said Stephen Hatfield put anthrax in those envelopes and mailed them to news media outlets and Congress, which is what he was accused of. No one said that. The FBI decided he's one of 5 people with the level of knowledge about anthrax that in the country, and that, hey, we better look at him and try to connect the dots that didn't connect. You have a wife who has cooperated at every step of the way, and now out of frustration produced a photo when she just, her story just got out there. Everyone, including Chief of Staff of the President, came to Rob Porter's defense and said what an honorable man he was. I think we're also still talking about this story because the White House has a communications director that participated in writing that story about someone that she was involved with and putting words in front of General Kelly to put out there to serve a certain thing. So it's a mess that needs to be cleaned up by an adult in the room. But when she produced it, Rob Porter had the opportunity to say, I did not hit her. And he did not say that. He said he took the photo, and she said, yes, he did. He was so apologetic and saying, please don't leave me. And she said, I want you to take a picture of this, and I'm going to hold on to it, because if you ever do it again, I want you held accountable. And he took the photo. She's been a lot more forthcoming than him. If he didn't hit her, due process in the public, we're in a court of public opinion here. We're not in a courtroom. Due process would mean him saying, I never hit her. He didn't say that. So I have a hard time having a whole lot of sympathy for him. Again, he was in a position, it's a privilege to serve in that position. He doesn't seem to meet the standards of having that job.
I'm going to talk about one other topic in a second, and that's
job for a year. I wonder why she waited a year before she made the allegations against him.
She didn't wait a year. She made the allegations to the FBI a year ago when they interviewed her doing a background check on him. She laid it all out. They all did. And it no doubt was reported to the White House as to why he did not get security clearance. Someone apparently has been poking around in his background. There's a lot of people in the White House that don't seem to have the security clearance that they need. Someone's been poking around about that, found her, and she talked to him. She's talked to him. He called her to say, people are poking around in my background. What are you going to say? She said, I'm going to say the truth. I'm going to tell the truth. She wrote a blog about something some months back. She didn't name him, but she wrote a blog about her coming to terms with abuse, and he talked to her about taking that down, and she's like, no, I'm not taking it down. I didn't name you. It's my story. This has been out there and talked about, and it just finally caught up with him. Someone got to her, sat down, said, will you talk about it? She did.
We're going to talk about one other issue in just a second. In terms of the Porter problem, again, to me, what really bothers me is that the president yet has not said anything about the women. Didn't do it Friday, didn't do it this weekend, hasn't done it today. I just find that to be just amazing, especially after firing Porter and still not saying anything about the women, but having,
well, there's really no evidence that Porter was fired, though, Steve. I mean, the statement was that he resigned and that some people in the White House tried to talk him out of resigning. General Kelly said he encouraged him to fight for the position.
Right.
So, they didn't even admit they fired him if in fact they did. I don't know if they did or not. But I agree with you, and I especially appreciate you saying that. And to Jim's point about why people are still talking about this, right or wrong, there seems to be in cable news, these things don't go away until you do acknowledge something wrong like that. If the president had said something last week sympathetic to the women, those cable shows might have taken the wind out of their sails on that too.
Yeah. Okay, so moving on to one other sale, and that is, I'm going to put up a tweet right now. And here's another story from Fox News. Diamond and Silk, those are the two African-American women who are very, very pro-Trump. And they said I think yesterday, since the media is so infatuated with Kim Yo Jong, maybe they should pack their stuff and move to North Korea. You're probably familiar with the article that CNN wrote, which basically saying that the sister has stolen the show. If you look on Twitter, you'll see just incredible stories or these tweets going on about how CNN really should never have said anything close to that. So your thoughts?
Jim?
Well, I'm not sure what she did. She sat in back of she sat in back of the secretary. No, I'm sorry, the vice president. So there's a picture I saw of the premier of North Korea's sister sitting in back of the vice president. Apparently, there was no conversation or anything like that because I didn't see that was all that was reported. And so I'm just not know what the story is there, you know.
Sure, it's related to the CNN article. I mean, that's really where the heat is, coming from a lot of Trump supporters, if I might say, and that is that I'm looking for the headline, but basically I'm going to paraphrase. Oh, here it is. Okay, Kim Jong-un's sister is stealing the show at the Winter Olympics. And the CNN article basically said about how she's playing this role of diplomat, and that she has come across as being the softer side of North Korea. CNN did mention in the article about how North Korea is just a heinous country in terms of the way they've dealt with human rights. But that didn't satisfy a lot of the people who have been critical. And so they're like, here's the statement, the tweet I put up, saying that those people who are siding with CNN or CNN should go to North Korea.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd like to go back to the days when the politics were supposed to be out of the Olympics. And this particular set of Olympics seems to have been an international stage for political pageantry to play out. I thought it was nice that North and South Korea united to walk in, march in together, and united for the women's hockey game. And it kind of highlighted, they're just like a civil war here in the United States that split families. Korea back in the 50s divided families that never were able to connect with each other again. So I thought that was the point of the civil rights abuses. There are other countries participate in the Olympics that have civil rights abuses. I don't think that's the place for it, but I would have not seated these people directly in front and behind of each other, so that every time you looked at it, you were seeing the Vice President of the United States refusing to applaud for the Korean athletes marching in. South Korea is one of our best allies. We have a tremendous presence in South Korea. We have a tremendous business interest, military interest there. And he had to sit there and not applaud because they marched in with the North Koreans. All that should have not happened. They should have seated them apart. He should have applauded when those athletes came in. They're there to compete, politics aside, they're there to compete. That's what the Olympics have always been about. And then it would have been on her if she refused to applaud the American athletes. It would have been her looking bad. But they certainly set it up for him to not look so good sitting there stoically while all that went on. If I were him, I would have refused to sit in front of her.
Jim?
Steve, in terms of issues to talk about, in terms of what is going on in the world, in this country, in this state, if I had to rank them, who applauded or who sat where at the Olympics that apparently is not getting much viewership as it has in the past, is not in my top 100. I don't really have any comment about it because I don't really care where she sat and where the vice president
No, but
sat.
you see, the point I'm making is that CNN...
I understand there's perception.
wrote an article.
I just don't see the story, and I don't see it all. I see it as a top level issue that really needs the attention. I guess CNN's looking for something to write about, but I just got no comment because I just don't think it's relevant. Anything we're talking about or what the country's talking about.
Okay, I'm looking at a tweet. It says, "Why does CNN support the concentration camps of North Korea?" That's the type of statement that you're seeing
Right.
on Twitter and also I will say on Fox News.
It has been very inflammatory over the weekend. I agree with you, Steve. It's just could have all been avoided in my opinion, and we wouldn't be talking about that. We would have kept, I mean, it's ice dancing for God's sakes, and the luge and snowboarding. It should not be the stage for the discussion that's going on. And to the extent everyone could turn it back to the sports and how we do have this little bubble of places where people that oppose each other in every other way of life come together for a week. It would be nice to put it back on that. But a lot of people have allowed it to be what it is. And the CNN article is pretty accurate, in my opinion. She's been given an ability to look better than she should have looked by meeting with the South Koreans, by watching their athletes come march in together, and the United States saying, hey, don't trust them, don't trust them. We've been on the defensive a little bit, and I would have liked to have seen us just rise above it and make that about the sports and these young athletes having the moment of their lives and keep the politics out of it.
So let me just throw this out to you, and then we'll close. And that is that, I mean, I understand about the North Korea, and I agree the athletes are not responsible. I mean, they're athletes, and I would have applaud. And what they're doing on Twitter is they're trying to say, well, basically they're should we have applauded Hitler in 1930 six Olympics, and so that's the parallel. My concern is this: why are we stopping in North Korea? I mean, what about the Russians? I mean, yeah, sure, we're not ready to nuke them, Russia, and we're trying to say normalize relationships with them. But Russia has not been glowing in terms of just civil rights and human rights. I mean, Putin has been horrific in that area. Yet the same people who are saying, well, big deal, Russia, are going after North Korea, and they should go after both.
Yes. Well, I think what you're seeing is the whole, are you for Trump or are you against Trump playing out in everything in our lives is what we're seeing. Jim?
Yeah.
Steve, I think Ronnah made the point earlier, though, is the Olympics the place to carry out some of these grudges or responses and like I say, trying to warm things up and bring about some peace and stop the nukes. And so I don't think the Olympics is a place to have any of these kind of statements being made. So the vice president should have kind of given a little applause. It shouldn't become this big a deal is my point. And apparently it has been to some people.
Okay, so listen, thank you so much. I mean, we really have covered the waterfront, no question about that, especially on Mardi Gras week. And we started about Mardi Gras. I think we covered as many issues as we talked about that we were going to cover. Did I leave anything out? If not, we should say goodbye.
Okay, we enjoyed it, Steve, as always.
Listen,
Yeah,
thank you so
Steve.
much. And guys, if you could just stay on for a second.
Happy Mardi Gras, happy Mardi Gras, everybody.
Again, thank you so much. I'm going to go click on a couple of buttons real quick. And thank you, audience, for watching. And please share with others. Make sure that you share with others so they get to see, read, and watch and hear pearls of knowledge. So let me turn these things off.